Brandon Sanderson has become an absolute household name within the fantasy book fan base. He's often matched with other heavy hitters such as George R. R. Martin, and sometimes even quite hyperbolically with Tolkien. Clearly, one of those comparisons is likely more apt, but definitely the waves that he's causing are similar to that of what Game of Thrones did when it released on video. He's kind of evolved into this kind of micro celebrity. He even had this convention appearance where he released his newest book, Wind and Truth, and that seemed to be very, very packed. Long story short, the man is a phenomenon. This man started writing really early on in his life. He's kind of gained a lot of praise, mostly because of how much he writes. Puts out 2 or 3 books every single year, upwards of 1,000 pages long. Being that productive as a writer is insane, and it's very commendable, honestly. Not only that, but also his universe, the Cosmere, has become a little bit of another phenomenon. You know, there's like a card game now, and there's talks about movie adaptations of like literally every single one of his books. And there's a lot of talk about Brandon Sanderson's world. And while I do think that this entire thing is quite commendable, the guy seems cool, doesn't seem to be like a stuck up celebrity or something like that. I do have a couple of bones to pick with the books that I read. So let me get to that. Now, let me give you a little bit of context of myself as a reader, because obviously what I'll be saying like really ties into that. And maybe my favorite books you dislike, and thus my opinion doesn't really apply to you, right? And honestly, who cares about my opinion at the end of the day? I'm just here making videos because I really enjoy making videos, and that's it. If you kind of feel a little bit aligned with what I'm saying, that's sick. If you don't, that's also really sick. I want to hear what you all think. So I've been reading for a little bit over 3-ish years. First book that got me back into reading was Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick. This is a sci-fi novel. If you don't know, it was the inspiration for the movie Blade Runner. Been getting into this art form more and more lately, and little by little I start discovering what I like and what I don't like. So far, my favorite books include The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin, Against the Day by Thomas Pynchon, and Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace. I really tend to enjoy things that are complex and layered, and I really like learning new words and stuff when I'm reading. For instance, Infinite Jest has like a ridiculous vocabulary, and some of the words, from what I know, are invented by David Foster Wallace. But at the same time, that's how language changes, right? Anyways, it's really cool. I really enjoy it. Back to Sanderson. So I've read The Final Empire, and I've read The Emperor's Soul. This was the first one I read, though, The Final Empire. I've also read The Well of Ascension by now. Now, let me be very clear. I have not finished Mistborn, and I plan to do so, but not soon. So I decided to make this video just to get it out. Maybe my opinion changes when I finish The Hero of Ages, but honestly, with a couple of the things that I have to talk about, I doubt it will. First off, let's talk about the prose. I guess the context I've provided before kind of helps you visualize what I'm going to think about Brandon Sanderson's prose. But, long story short, I don't like it at all. I think it's very boring. It's really annoying. You get explained the magic system like 4 or 5 different times in the book, and I don't need that. I'm sorry. If I'm going to get into a magic system, I want to see it in action. I don't care about you telling me how it works. I get why it's so attractive, because it's very easy to get into. There are better ways to tell a story that has a really interesting magic system. Let me talk about Christopher Ruocchio for a second. Now, this guy, if you've never heard of him, wrote the Sun Eater series. It's a sci-fi series that is very much influenced by Dune. And let me just read 2 passages for you, and they're both in the first chapter of each book. First, I'll read one from The Final Empire. The obligator turned, raising an eyebrow, the motion done as if to highlight his most distinctive feature, the intricate tattoos that laced the skin around his eyes. The tattoos were enormous, reaching all the way across his brow and up to the size of his nose. This was a full Prelan, a very important obligator indeed. let me be very clear. I chose the best section in both of the chapters, okay? Now, for Empire of Silence. The light of that murdered sun still burns me. I see it through my eyelids, blazing out of history from that bloody day, hinting at fires indescribable. It is like something holy, as if it were the light from God's own heaven that burned the world and billions of lives with it. You get what I'm saying, right? Just the way that they both command the English language is very different. And I feel like the Final Empire just falls very flat in terms of prose. I think most fans of Brandon Sanderson probably know that his prose is not the best. I was not expecting it to be so simple. Honestly, I wasn't, because this is a book that I'm reading as an adult and that I'm expected to read as an adult, because this is not marketed as a young adult story, at least not from my experience. Now, as an example of something that is also simple in prose and doesn't have like this flamboyant poetic vocabulary, is Dune. And the difference between Dune and the Final Empire is that Dune feels mature. Dune doesn't rehash everything. I get to know the characters through the story and through what they do or don't do. In the case of Mistborn, it feels like I'm supposed to feel one way about one character and supposed to feel one way about the other, you know? The Lord Ruler is a terrible man, and we're told that he's a terrible man 1,000 times throughout the book. While that's fine, it's not something that attracts me at all. As far as the Emperor's Soul is concerned, the prose is the same in that, so I don't really have much more to say. Let me get on to another section, the love interest. This is another negative that I've heard discussed here and there, especially with a couple of my friends who are Brandon Sanderson fans. The love interest feels really, really, really rushed and really weird, and they both act like third graders. And while, they are supposed to be like 16, 17, and while I'm not the biggest romance fan and I don't expect all of my books to have the biggest romance, if you're going to give me romance, then make it adult, make it interesting. And I'm not talking about like, ooh, make it adult, but the way they act should be adult. These two characters don't act like that. Maybe it's like maybe the point is that it's part of the world as well, because it doesn't feel like there's a lot of love going around in the world. Even that, I think, is a stretch to say. I am making the case for the book more than the book is making the case for itself. Let me get to the world, because this is where I have some good things to say. Naturally, this isn't a review of Brandon Sanderson's novels if I don't talk about the world building. That's what all of his fans love to praise him for. Kind of what I was expecting to be the best and, the creme de la creme, if you will. But yeah, and it is, he hits. It's really good. I think the world feels really alive. I did feel quite immersed, honestly, even if sometimes I had to stop and be like, because I'm annoyed. I wanted to keep reading because I was interested in the world, right? And that only got better in The Well of Ascension, I must say. The world is just really cool, and honestly, the magic system as a concept is super dope, but I'll get to that. For your information, I am using a Medium post that I did a couple of months ago, I think almost a year ago now, when I read The Final Empire and The Emperor's Soul. I read them back to back. And I had not read The Well of Ascension. Now, I'll link that down below, but be wary that at some point I say that the magic system runs pretty shallow. And I do think I need to retract that statement from that article, because while it does seem shallow in the first book, kind of expands a little bit in The Well of Ascension. And it's honestly the reason I'm intrigued to read the next one. He's being able to do a lot of really interesting things with the magic system, and there's different implications to how the politics work in the world with the magic system. And I just thought that that was really clever. And let me talk about the magic system of the book that I enjoy more, The Emperor's Soul. And that's the reason I enjoy The Emperor's Soul more, because I think the magic system is really, really cool as a concept. And I feel like if he ever explores it further, it could be much deeper even than what Mistborn's magic system is. Now, let me be clear, I'm not the biggest fantasy guy, so I don't know a lot about magic systems in general, and I'm not sure if this is like tangibly better than others, at least in comparison to what I've read in fantasy, it does seem to be better and much more present in the world. Emperor's Soul magic system is like more artistic and introspective in nature. And I really like that approach. I think, a magic system not just being about like, ooh, I can fight, you know, is nice and feels more alive. And it just feels cooler in my eyes to have something that could be real. There's a reason Spider Man is one of the most beloved characters ever. Because Spider Man is the closest thing we have to an actual human in the superhero universes, other than like Tony Stark. But even then, Tony Stark's a billionaire. Spider Man is just a dude, and his magic system kind of influences the rest of his life. It all just becomes a web. I couldn't even finish the sentence. It was so terrible. Now, let me talk about the characters really quickly. I felt that the characters were good. What do I mean by that? I think the characters fit the story and the way he writes. They don't really stray from being the good guy or being the reckless guy. I think that's also one of the reasons that I had a little bit of a hard time with Vin as the main character, because she's very stale throughout the novel and she does grow in certain senses. Her character grows into the magic system more than it grows as a character. Vin learns how to use the magic system without actually growing as a person. But again, it's something that's super simple to understand. You don't have to focus on like all of the character antics. You can just focus on her being really good at using the magic system. Again, it fits, and I don't necessarily think it's like a terrible deterrent to the novel. I just think it's there. It's pretty mid. Now, let me talk a bit about Vin and Kelsier. Kelsier is cool because he's supposed to be cool and he never does uncool stuff. It's cool to see a character who has a lot of courage and who really doesn't care about repercussions, because he cares more about, his loved one. But sometimes it felt like he was just cool for the sake of being cool, and um, it also felt like Vin was annoying for the sake of being annoying. It felt one dimensional, but they fit. Let me talk about this book in particular now. This just feels better, and maybe it's because it's shorter and Sanderson doesn't have the chance to repeat to me what the fucking magic system does 17 times. As I was saying, the magic system is a little more introspective and like kind of artistic, and it's based on like art. I thought it was very original. I didn't think that, a book of Brandon Sanderson, from the perspective of an outsider, would ever be something like The Emperor's Soul. Yeah, I mean, this book is great. If there is like fantasy that does something like this, even if it's not Brandon Sanderson, recommend it to me. The only problem is that it just inflamed my issues with the Final Empire. This being so good also meant that he can not repeat himself for 500 pages straight. If the Final Empire was like maybe 3 times this book, for context, it's about 5 or 6 times this book, it would be much better. It just would. I'm sorry, but it would. And that's my biggest gripe. I don't need to read 700 pages of something you could write in 300. Ironically, you could say that about like a lot of the books I listed in the beginning. But at the end of the day, right, those books have a lot of depth. Against the Day is very socially deep, and like the characters are super interesting, and all of the crazy stories that they go on, and the prose is really interesting. And the book chemist talks about it feeling like Final Fantasy in Pinchon verse, and I completely agree. It's so cool. And then Infinite Jest is definitely very long, but that's also kind of the point of the book, right? Like it's kind of poking fun at you. That's the name of the book, The Infinite Jest, right? These ones are too long, and that's it. Finally, let me talk about The Well of Ascension. So much better. Oh my god, it is much better. Same issues as the first one. The prose is boring, characters are flat, but there's a lot of political intrigue. I thought that it made for a much more interesting book. And I also must say The Well of Ascension has a very cool ending where I really want to know what happens next. It's basically the reason I'm going to read the final one. I forgot a very important point as to why I dislike the Final Empire. Spoiler warning, Okay, you are being warned about spoilers on the Final Empire. I hate Kelsier's death. I wasn't expecting him to have this like grandiose ending or anything. I didn't expect him to keep living either. I think it's pretty obvious that he dies from like the very first third of the book or something. But Brandon Sanderson has been overwriting 500 pages up until the point where Kelsier dies and he just writes 3 sentences. He just kind of wanted Kelsier out of the picture so that Vin could shine. And when Vin shines, none of it makes sense. And, you know, I do get that the point is that Vin is kind of like the chosen one and like, you know, she has a really great command of her allomancy or whatever. The other point that I think is important about subversion here is that the book doesn't try to subvert you about anything else. It's always just this happens and then this happens and this person's like this and this other person's like this. So when Kelsier dies and then he tries to be subversive in that sense, it falls flat. It feels cheap. Anyways, I will be saying bye bye. Let me know if I can do something better, if it sounds good, if it looks good, if you like this format, if you want me to talk a little bit deeper about certain things, let me know. I'm completely open to criticism. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and comment and subscribe and all of the plethora of things that YouTubers normally ask. Let me know what I should read next, and I'll catch you in the next one.